Hello, and welcome to the Voice of Reason podcast. Today's guest is Stella O'Malley, who is an Irish psychologist. In 2018, Channel 4 released a documentary titled Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk, and Stella O'Malley was, I guess, the central voice in that documentary. Stella experienced severe gender dysphoria when she was growing up, and then she moved past that, and she wanted to take an opportunity on my channel to explore that a little bit more and talk about her concerns as a psychologist for the youth of today and how identity and diagnosis are interrupting on some levels the development of a sense of self. So I hope that this finds you well stocked and not panicking, and I hope that you're healthy and, take a little break, take a little walk while you're experimenting with what us introverts call normal life, but what the media at this point in time is calling social distancing. Here's Stella O'Malley.
So you're in Dublin now?
I am in Dublin. I'm from Dublin. I'm actually in the bedroom I grew up in. So my mum was sick and I thought I'd be in Offaly, which is in rural Ireland where I live, for this interview, but I'm not. I'm looking after my ma and talking to you.
Does it bring back memories to be in that room then? Because that's what we're kind of nominally going to speak about.
Yeah, well, isn't that funny? Because, obviously I stay here fairly often, but talking to you about what I presume we're going to be talking to, I'd say is kind of strange and appropriate to be in this room. Because it's my bedroom for my entire childhood.
In the article that you sent, you speak about a panel that you went to about what it is to be a woman in this day and age. And I think it was during the filming or towards the end of the filming of this. And you guys were protested.
Yeah.
And I remember there was this one transgender individual that I interviewed because they were in this documentary being rather violent, or at least got physical. I wonder if it's the same person. They wrote a little article in the
in the Guardian.
Like yeah,
it is the same person, and I was really pleased when that person wrote that article, because we had that experience and it was horrible and it was harrowing and sad, and then we moved. We recorded lots of other things for the next 6 months, and then the film went out. And then that person, I can't think of her name, but anyway, that person wrote a beautiful article saying that she was ashamed about the violence and she was shocked to see herself on screen. And her granny had basically said, you should be ashamed of yourself. And then she rose to that challenge and wrote about it very eloquently. And I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled.
I had her on and she was very... And we just spoke through that stuff and spoke about her kind of de-radicalization or kind of maturation. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot with the radicals, I began my kind of journalism focusing on college students and with regards to American race relations. But I moved away from the race relations to focus on transgenderism because it's kind of the same, the activist side has kind of the same patterns of behavior, and it doesn't have that entrenched racial history that makes the conversation almost impossible for me to actually navigate. So that one of the things that I was happy to speak with about was to show that process of maturation in going from an ideology that proves that you're right or just assumes that you're right so that you can act however you want into a more self-reflexive being a human being kind of thing.
Isn't it fascinating when if you have been radicalized, it takes a lot of courage to come back, and I don't think it's anybody who can do it. It's much simpler to stay radicalized once you've been radicalized, and stay with the slogans and stay on the simpler road than go into the complicated, messy ground, which is what is required if you're going to be de-radicalized. But I'm surprised to hear that race relations are so entrenched. That's the innocent in me.
In America?
Yeah.
Oh, geez, you don't know.
Really?
It's really heavy stuff out here. And there's there's so much built up around it that there's a lot of people with vested interest in keeping racial tensions as high as possible. And there's a lot of different rhetorical maneuvers that are constantly being developed that slow down the ability to actually engage with the ideas or to, to navigate that. So I reached kind of like the end of what I could actually feel like I could do any sort of movement towards reconciliation.
So race relations are more entrenched and more polarized than trans relations.
Well, the trans stuff is smaller. It's easier to get the head around, and it kind of goes across. It doesn't have the history that American race relations have, so. Yeah. And it's kind of newer too, and it's coming out of left field for a whole lot of people. So there's a lot to like learn about and discover. Yeah.
I remember somebody once saying to me, "Never has he come across an issue." Sorry about this clicking. Never has he come across an issue where you presume you're this and you're actually completely that. That it's so kind of everything you know is wrong. If you follow me, if you presume you're a liberal, you presume you're going to believe A, B, and C. And then you realize if you penetrate deeper, the more liberal would be this. And it's like everything you know is wrong. It turns on your head everything, which makes it so compelling, I think.
So when did that film come out, The Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk?
It came out in November 2018. So that was about 15 months ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's been your experience since then with this topic?
I thought I'd probably leave it behind. I have a nice life, and I thought I'd explored it in the film, and I'd kind of given my views, and I'd done my little bit maybe to help people, and I'd leave it be. And that hasn't happened at all. I've become a lot more embroiled in it, and, kind of reluctantly. But, when somebody asks you a question, I suppose I can't refuse it. And I've just continuously been kind of going further into it. And I know people would be thinking, let it go, Stella. Like, I'd have obviously a lot of friends who are therapists, and they're like, let it go. You've done your thing. And it's like, as Lisa Marciano, who I saw you interviewed, she said, it's the biggest ethical question of our industry. And I think it is a real, very profoundly ethical question of, do you join in the ethical debate when you think something awful is happening? Or do you just stay out because professionally it would be a lot more safer to stay out of it?
Mm-hmm. And what's the risk for you professionally in Ireland, or even socially in Ireland? What's the climate around that in Ireland?
In Ireland, it's fascinating, because England is there in the middle of these kind of wars, and Ireland is staying right out of it. I remember Brian Friel was asked, what does it mean to be Irish? And he said, not English. And that's very much our kind of mentality in Ireland. And so I would argue an awful lot of people in Ireland are basically staying well out of it, looking at England and saying that's a hellish, very complicated and polarised, and let's just be liberal here in Ireland and let everything happen. And I think that comes from a really nice place, insofar as it's a very welcoming and accepting and tolerant attitude, and I agree with it. It's come in very much on the back of we used to be a very intolerant, very bigoted, very narrow-minded kind of society, because we were so kind of entrenched with the Catholic Church and entrenched with an awful lot of old-fashioned ideals. And then we've kind of come out of that, and now our Prime Minister is gay, and there's so many lovely things that happened. We, legalised gay marriage. And in the middle of all that, when we were legalising gay marriage, on a kind of a sweep of kind of liberal thinking in the last few years, we also, made self-identity, kind of the MO in Ireland. Yeah. And so everybody is, when your question was how has it been in response, everybody is looking at me saying there's no problem here. And I'm like, yeah, well, actually there is. I see a lot of teenagers who are kind of devastated. I'm a psychotherapist, and I see them in my clinic, and they're devastated. They don't know who they are and what they are, and it has impacted a lot of people, and there are a lot of people who are distressed with gender dysphoria, and it isn't all a happy place. And just because our laws are tolerant doesn't mean that everybody is happy. So I suppose I think we've been very mindless in Ireland, and it isn't madly to our credit to be mindless. I think we could do with a lot more considered and intelligent analysis of what is the right way forward.
When you relax the rules too far, it wreaks havoc on young people, by which I mean a little bit of rails or lines or boundaries is actually really beneficial for young people. And if it's a free-for-all, especially with identity, if it's just a free-for-all, there might be a lot of young people who suffer because of the lack of structure.
That is a really interesting point, because when you come from a world that I come from, where there was so much emphasis on conservatism and family values and your family and all this, that you kind of immediately turn away from it and you see it as just old-fashioned. And yet, as you get older, you think, whoa, there's a wealth in that. There's a wealth in knowing where you came from it. There's a wealth that you can throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I feel that is what happened in a lot of levels in Ireland, that we were a deeply traditional society. And now we've just kind of flung ourselves into liberalism.
And that was just over the last, 2, 3, 4 decades? How quick was that process?
I'd say since the 90s, we've become very liberal. And I'm delighted we have, but I think we've lost something. I think we've lost something along the way. And there was some real merit in it. And I think there's still lots of, obviously, old-fashioned people around, but there's an intelligence and a wealth of wisdom in tradition that I didn't appreciate when I was younger. And apparently I read, which I thought was fascinating, the average age for somebody to become conservative is 48. I'm 45.
Oh no, it's going to happen.
I'll be hit with the conservative push. I doubt it, because I'm intensely liberal. But I think it's very interesting that so many of my friends I've noticed become more conservative as they got older, and kind of are suddenly hearkening back to the days of a more conservative Ireland. But I think something you just said there, I just want to go back to that. The teenagers, I don't think this has anything to do with conservatism and everything to do with good mental health, which is teenagers and children need boundaries, and they do not need their head wrecked about what identity they are. And, in my first book, Cottonwool Kids, I was all about, this labelling of children is going to impact us. It's a huge issue. If you label kids left, right and centre, you're really shaping their psyche in profound ways. And it's really, we don't know what we're getting into by labelling identities when they're 8 or when they're 12. How we're shaping them, we don't know, because we're new to this. And I'm not talking about gender identity, I'm just talking about labels and identities that children are kind of being thrust upon their heads. And I think it's having a huge impact on them. And I'm really concerned about it. And then gender identity has jumped into this. And so, kids come to me and I don't know whether I'm this, and they name all the different identities they could have. And they're worrying about it. They are genuinely concerned and genuinely lost and trying to find who they are. And they're trying to find it through a prism of identity, as opposed to, you're one of the 7 billion, you're one of the 8 billion. That's who you are. You know what I mean? There's nobody else like you. And so trying to find the right descriptive terms and diagnosis or identity that makes it you, it's a false journey. And an awful lot of teenagers are on it. And I think it's really causing them a huge amount of distress. But teenagers have always been distressed. So, and to look for your identity is exactly appropriate between 12 and 20. That's psychologically what you should be doing. So they're certainly doing it. But I think it's being really complicated by the identity issue. Yeah.
Yeah, that Joseph Campbell book, The Hero of Many Faces, kind of makes an argument that there's a pattern of behavior that can manifest through many different cultures, but there's something that we did, and I want to explore more of this with you, of allowing identity, or the concept of identity, to like move into a carnival, a chaotic, free for all that lacks true depth or lacks attachment to a tradition. And I'm Irish by descent, and I've done a sizable amount of research into the Druidic culture and the Celtic culture and the Irish, the old school, the ancient Irish tradition of like how education was formed, where you ended up doing a whole bunch of memorization, and like for the poets, like poetry was just embedded in your culture, and so there's all this creativity, but it seems to be lacking that. What do you mean when you started to talk in the Cotton Wall Kids about identity? What is that? Where did that come from? Are you talking about like goth, punk?
No, I'm talking about ADHD, ADD, OCD,
okay.
Autism, ASD.
So diagnosis as identity.
Yes. That, and a lot of kids who come to me are keeping when they're teenagers, when they're a kid, they're totally cool with their identities, and when I say it's identities, it's their diagnosis, but they've been almost, given it. My own kids have dyslexia, and you can see that they kind of say, "Oh, I'm dyslexic." You can see they own it a little bit. It's a very big concept to give to a kid. And you try to say, you have dyslexia, you aren't dyslexic. And they're like, yeah. And I think it's a real big issue, because I see a lot of teenagers who hide those diagnoses when they're older. So they were completely cool about getting it when they were 8. And then now they feel it's embarrassing. And I think we need to kind of go back and look at all of that, and how to bring in diagnosis, and how to bring in everything to do with labeling has been arrived in the last 20 years into children's lives. And it's very helpful for parents to understand children, but I'm not sure it's very helpful for children to understand themselves, because I feel it confines them a little bit.
I wonder if you're diagnosing that the teenagers are embarrassed by their conditions, not because they have the condition, but because of the identity. It's like a piece of clothing that's embarrassing to them. It actually has less to do with the actual status of them of having a disorder or a disability in some way, but the social ramifications of being a part of that club, that they don't want to be a part of that club.
Yeah, they don't want to be part of that club, and I feel they've been thrust into it. And I don't know how. I don't have a solution about this. I'm just concerned that over-categorizing of us all hasn't really got us anywhere. And I know an awful lot of doctors, and I really like it, that they say, you might have autistic traits, you might have OCD traits. And I think that's a much wider and much more progressive way to go with this. And the very same with gender dysphoria or trans, if you have traits of, so that you can work with that, and you can kind of become who you are without becoming the archetypal category, because I think that's very confining.
Do you have experience of that with your own self, like being wrestling with identity after the gender dysphoria, like in your teenage years?
No.
Or your early 20s?
No, it didn't come up to me at all. I wasn't diagnosed with anything, really. I probably could have been diagnosed with a whole lot of things, but I haven't been diagnosed with anything. I would be, very reluctant to diagnose myself with gender dysphoria as a kid, except I've seen all the kind of traits. I've seen the DSM, I've seen the checklist, and I do know I could have ticked all of the traits on that list. But I came from a world, 1980s Ireland, certainly nobody was bringing me off to be diagnosed anyway. Nobody's bringing anybody off to be diagnosed at that age. And that's what I was talking about earlier when I said there was a wealth in it. There was a huge vibe of let them be, let them off, they'll find themselves. And while on one level you could say a lot of people suffered under that because they felt lonely and abandoned in their distress, it also might have added depth, and they might have found themselves in their own individuality in a very stronger, much more solid kind of way. And that would be, I would argue, me, that I did come through it. Now, lots of people got lost in that, so I'm not saying that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. It is interesting that, that let them off and benign neglect and things like that can actually work very well for some people.
Yeah.
We haven't figured out who. And certainly cotton wool doesn't seem to work out very well at all.
It's, I guess, as a balancing act, or there always needs to be like a meta study or a meta conversation about the way in which we approach distress, and being able to tell the difference, or being able to tell who's going to benefit from, just being lonely and going on their own, and who's going to benefit from having a label, from thinking about themselves as possessing certain traits of this group, or having a specific reason why they are distressed. Because with the rapid onset gender dysphoria phenomena, that's still a loose term right now, but there's these young women who, it seems, are going through all these physical changes and all this emotional distress about their physical changes, and they're presented with this out, like this out, which is a very solid, specific gender dysphoria. This is my solution. Well, it's the name the problem is to give them a solution, but then attached to that solution is a whole wealth of other problems that don't necessarily actually solve anything.
Yes, and that name the problem for the solution. It's such a dodgy concept. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can name the problem all you want. It doesn't mean you've got anywhere near the solution. Having said that, I do remember when I explained to my daughter, my oldest girl, that she had a condition called dyslexia, and her face just changed, and she said, "Can you tell my teacher and friends that?" And she said it very seriously, as in, "Oh, thank you, got it, understand, right. Now the world needs to know this about me and stop whining at me about spelling." So, she was right, yeah. So that was very interesting for me, because I was like, oh, there's another side to this complex scenario that I've seen how it works in certain terms. But I also think, I wonder, had I been diagnosed as a child, I think it would have shaped me. I think it would have shaped me a lot. And so probably it's no wonder I'm a bit nervy around diagnosis as a result.
So you when we were chatting on Twitter, you said that you hadn't really explored or spoken about the distress of wrestling with that, am I a boy? Or am a girl? And I was wondering if you want to talk about that and how you ended up owning that distress, and how...
Yeah, I do want to, because I think I haven't really said much about it. It would have been from the ages of about 3, simply as far back as I can go, as I can remember, until I was about, I don't know, until around about puberty, I'd say. So maybe 10, I don't know. It's hard to remember the ages. But I do know, like, for the first few years, imagine you're 3, 4, and 5. I was quite comfortable. I was a boy. The world had it wrong, and that's fine. And I was very good at being a boy in my world. In my head, I was very good at being a boy, and I was completely comfortable with the situation. I'd imagine around about 6 or 7, I started to come to consciousness about the world around me, and I started to realise, oh, parents and adults in the room are being slightly patronising here. I wouldn't have had that language, but I certainly had those thoughts, if you follow me. I wouldn't have been able to articulate them. And I was aware that there was almost half smiles going on between adults about me. And this made me murderous. How dare they doubt my living reality? Well, I certainly hadn't those words, but how dare they deny my existence was where I was at. I was mortified, and that they might have, I probably, if I was to go deeper into it, I'd say I felt found out, and I don't think there's anything more horrible than feeling found out. in the world. Like it's a pretty horrible feeling. And I feel I felt found out, but I looked away. But I think it turned the whole feeling of I'm a boy into something much darker and much more aggressive and much more angry and much more, yeah, I'm a boy. Have you got a problem? Do you know what I mean? I was coming out fighting then, like. And I think it's very interesting, and I don't think it's been explored enough, about how much we try to save face in this world, and how much I remember, and you remember, I've no doubt, when you're a kid, how awful it was to feel you're being laughed at by adults and that you're not being taken seriously and you're being a bit silly. And I know that sounds really childish and silly. When you're living it, it's not. It's horrible. You know what I mean? It really was. And I was very angry at them, but I didn't really know how to kind of navigate that. And then all the kids in my world used to come up to me saying, are you a boy or a girl? And I'd sometimes say, a boy, and look at them very aggressively. I was very aggressive. And sometimes say, neither. So I was quite non-binary. And I didn't know how to navigate it. It used to be that question haunted me for my childhood. So I was obviously known around the town as that kid. You know, that kid who doesn't, you know, is she a boy or a girl? Or is this, you know what I mean, is he a boy or a girl? I know a good few people have said to me they thought I was a boy for the first 6 months of knowing me. And, you know, I very much presented as a boy. And that was fine in 1980s Dublin. You just didn't comment, you know, nobody commented on it. But like I say, I was aware of those half smiles. Then I became a little bit older and I realised this is problematic. You know, I started to become aware of this is problematic. I'm saying this when I'm that. Huh. Now, how do I get out of that? It was a disaster. I remember feeling really, really lost and alone and not knowing what to do and feeling very disturbed and very distressed, genuinely very, very all over the place about it, and not knowing what I should do. I remember one girl, it's interesting because I've never really seen her since, but I'd say I was about 8 and she was probably about 14 in this room, actually, funnily enough, in this bedroom, and she was having a sleepover. I didn't know her, she was my sister's friend, 6 years older than me, and she was very aggressive, and she said to me, you'd want to watch yourself. I was like you when I was a kid, and I couldn't get out of it. And I became in a prison there, and you're stuck, and you'd want to watch yourself. And I was just stood against the wall, just over there, just stood against the wall, like, I didn't even answer her. I didn't even go, I didn't say anything. I just went, and she really named the problem for the solution. That was a major point in my life. Wow. She said, yeah, little does she know, that I suddenly realised I'm in trouble. I've lived my whole life saying this. And I know people say, you're just a kid. Man, it was my whole life. It was I don't see very much difference between me and me then, except I'm much more articulate. But I was absolutely in trouble. Imagine if your whole life you'd lived like this. And now you're starting to suspect, Jesus Christ, I have to be this. And how the hell do I get over there? It was horrible. It was really horrible. So what I did, around about that age, maybe 8, 9, 10, I started to go very quiet. People would ask me it, and I became out very hostile, very much, I'm a boy. Probably at my most intensely hostile and aggressive was when I was most unsure of myself. And when I was much freer and like, yeah, I'm a boy, was when I was very comfortable with it. But when I was very angry and distressed was when I was much more overtly, I'm a boy. And I'd say it to people, and I became very angry, and I can see why, because I'd got myself into an awful situation. Talk about painting yourself into a corner. I'd got myself into an awful situation. And at the very same time, puberty was happening, and my body was taking a mind of its own. Just like if I'd walked into the toilet and grown another head, I don't think I would have been surprised. It was happening to me. Sweet suffering Jesus. And so all thoughts of you're a boy were going into kind of, you're a mess. Do you know what I mean? You're just what is this? You're just a mess. And it was horrible. And then incredibly difficult to come back from. And I think, when people are treating children with gender dysphoria, and I'm talking about children as opposed to teenagers, but I'd say it's very similar. The saving face, the feeling of how can I get out of here with my pride intact? That's really hard. I don't know what the solution to that is. Because everything you've said doesn't add up, and we've been kind of nodding along thinking you'll come to your senses soon.
Yeah. Unfortunately, for better or worse, I don't think you can save somebody from being humbled by life. It's kind of a necessary process.
But I want to. Oh, crap. I'll go and be a painter.
In your article, you mentioned that the being a boy or claiming to be a boy was a defense mechanism for the difficulty of your life. Could you describe, what was it about being a boy that was so important? Was it just that people would treat you differently, or that you were able to plug into the world in a special manner that you didn't think was available to you as a girl?
I think the latter, but I'm not sure, because I'm kind of a little bit unsure. I've thought about this a lot in the last few years, what made me want to be a boy. You see, it would have been before I came to consciousness, if you follow me. My instinct tells me it was what you said, that there was a power with being a boy in that old-fashioned society that I said, that's where I'm going.
Okay.
I'm joining the power group. You lot can stay over there. I was very dismissive of girls. And by the way, I was very dismissive of tomboys. I used to think, look at those stupid girly tomboys trying to be a boy. This is how you do it. So I was very much very powerful in the feeling of being a boy. It was very much, that's where I was relating to it. Yeah, I think so.
So when you were coming of age, or when you were that age, you were actually in a society that was very conservative, that had very strict gender roles compared to now.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. Yeah, on another level, you'd say in the 1990s they brought in the pink and the blue, didn't they? And it was such a marketing phenomenon. Okay. You know what I mean? So I missed all that. So I wasn't playing Lego, but had I been playing Lego, it wouldn't have been pink or blue. You know what I mean? It would have been that non-genderized world. But yeah, I could play football, and I was good at football, but there was no way I could have joined a team because the teams were for the boys. So it was certainly the system was old-fashioned. But, there was a lot less sparkles, a lot less pink, a lot less of that crap going on,
So with that in mind, was part of your owning your womanhood, experimenting with the aesthetics of the feminine in your teenage years? Was that a way of coping?
No. I was very busy trying to say, can we just forget that? Can we just not gender me at all? Can we just not comment, not look? Can I just wear what I would now call gender neutral clothes, and let nobody comment on me, on my clothes, and on how I look? Because I'm in the middle of trying to come back from another planet, and I don't want anybody to comment. And if somebody said something, either you look well or oh, you've changed, I would suffer mortification because they'd noticed me. I felt found out. You get me? I did not want anybody to notice that I'd stopped talking about being a boy, that I'd started to wear ordinary clothes that could technically be called girls' clothes, and nobody mentioned this. And I remember once a friend of mine, she was trying to be nice to me, and I was about 14 or 15, and she said, we can only go to this restaurant, it was her dad's restaurant, if you wear a skirt. It's very posh, so you have to wear a skirt. Oh my God, I thought I was going to die. I really did. Yeah, I know it sounds so stupid.
Well, no. Some females that I've spoken to about this was that they were trying to avoid the male gaze, or there was something in the male gaze that demeaned them, or being sexually attractive was demeaning to them. Seems like you're describing something other than unwanted male attention and putting on a skirt.
Yeah, you're right. I think you're right. I don't think the male gaze was on my mind at all. I think I was so busy. embarrassingly, now I'm thinking about it, saving face. I don't think it was the male gaze. I don't think it was any, because think about it, it started at such a young age, like 2 or 3. You know, it was. I think I was going towards the power. Then I'd got myself into a situation that I didn't particularly want to be in, and I wanted to come back from it. Not because I wanted to be a girl, but because I didn't see any other option.
Okay.
Do you know, I didn't see there was an option that I could transition. There was no option. It wasn't there as an option. So my only option was to come back from saying I was a boy, because actually that doesn't wash in society. And somewhere along from 8 onwards, I was realising that doesn't wash. People are going to smile at that. And so you can't do that. So now can you just come back from that and just be like ordinary people who nobody mentions whether you're a girl or a boy. You're just an ordinary person. And it's just not commented on. And so I tried desperately to live this kind of life where just me being a girl was completely irrelevant for a long time. And then around about, I suppose about 16, suddenly fellas were fancying me, and I realised the massive power of being a sexual woman. And I went, wow. How did I miss all this? And so I embraced it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it is actually. So by 16, I'd completely gone through it. So that's a long period of pulling off that plaster. But I know for a fact at 16, I'll tell you why, because actually something happened, and so I can date it. I went away with my boyfriend for a summer, and I lost a lot of weight. Part of that kind of, person, I was wearing these big jumpers, and I'd weight on me, and I never, ever cut my hair. And if I did, it would have been me, just like with a scissors. Like I did nothing. I'd never wear makeup. I was very kind of. But in the middle of all that, some fella fancied me. Imagine. I can't imagine why. And I went away with him, and he was mad about me. He just adored me, and I lost a lot of weight when I was away with him. And then when I came back, my friend brought me to. She worked as a hairdresser. And she brought me to her hairdresser, and she cut my hair and dyed it. I'm not naturally red, I'm naturally your colour. And she dyed it red and gave me a fringe and cut it. And it was like I just suddenly became really just like, I'm pretty. And I remember I walked into the chipper on the way back from that haircut. And the guy, he was a lorry driver, and he was standing queuing at the chipper. And he turned around and he went, "You're gorgeous." And I was like, yes.
Wow.
I am. It was fabulous. It was lovely. And it was a real celebration of having been through a really dark first 16 years to being, wow, this is gorgeous and lovely. Wow. And just light. Light is what it was.
So that sounds profoundly like a Persephone or kind of mythology, like where you're down and then you kind of came out and you blossomed in a profound way. What was it to be a woman then? Did you have to discover what it was, or did you just own it and it was secondary to your personality? Was it an identity that you wore, or was it a set of attributes and powers that you had access to, like a palette?
I'd say I was still always going to be a slightly boyish woman, you know what I mean? But yeah, I owned it completely. I'd say I owned it totally. From then on, I was very, very, I am a woman, and I'm proud to be a woman, very definitely. And yeah, it was, like you say, Persephone, it was really, I was in the darkness, and there's a lightness that came upon me at around about that age that is just so lovely compared to the heaviness of the girl who would have been in this bedroom. Do you know what I mean? Just everything was so heavy. And then just suddenly life was lighter and fun, and I can see it sometimes with people who desist. The people who desist, you can see there's a lightness, a fun and a lighter touch to life that I really remember. Kind of thinking, there's a whole exploration of being a woman. But I'd say I was very comfortable being a woman, but I don't know if you're kind of half asking me this, so I'll answer it just in case you are half asking me it. I didn't suddenly become some sort of dolly bird who was mad into makeup and wearing heels and tottering around. I never went that way. It was never my way of being a woman. But I certainly enjoyed wearing dresses and very much enjoyed my figure and enjoyed male attention with absolute bring it on. Yeah.
Do you think that having that experience, that childhood, is what propelled you towards working in psychology? Is that kind of what informed you about wanting to do this work?
That, but not only that. Loads of different things that happened to me in my life, I'd say, informed me. But that was the start. And it was a very weird little start. It's funny, later on when I became an adult and I would say to people, oh yeah, I used to be a tomboy. People would be surprised, like, really? Or they'd say, oh yeah, I see it in you, type thing. And then people would often say to me, oh yeah, I used to be. And I actually stopped saying it to people because I realised, no. My experience was nothing like, oh, I used to climb trees and play football. I realised, no. I was in a way, I became self-protective of a really dark experience that happened to me. And I wasn't going to let it be turned into, oh, you used to be a tomboy, so did I. Woo, high five, sister. So it's just, I don't know why I suddenly felt the urge to tell you that, but it was a way of me realising, actually, I went a whole world deeper and darker, and I came out of it, and it was lovely to come out of it, but to call it tomboy isn't, while it's a quick word, it's not actually a descriptive word of what I was coming from. That wasn't what you asked me, though. What did you ask me?
No, that's fine. It's just, I think we've already retread this question, but like, why do you think that you went,
why do I become a psychotherapist?
No, well, why do you think that being a boy, wanting a boy was so intrinsic to your experience? I think you tried to answer that already, but the way you're describing it, it's so profoundly deep.
Yes, it was. Thank you. It really was. And I don't think I've really explained that to many people. But it was really heavy and powerful and not nice and deeply uncomfortable. You know that way? You know that illness that I think is a Joni Mitchell has where she has the mushrooms? She thinks she has mushrooms growing out of her skin. You know that thing?
No. Oh.
Okay. Well, I think I'm right. Joni Mitchell, many people have this illness. I think it's a mental illness. I'm not sure if it is. And they think there's things growing out of their skin. It's just like from the very core of your body, it's all wrong. Everything about me is wrong. And it is a horrible thing. So I have so much sympathy for anybody with gender dysphoria because it's like, yeah, everything about me is wrong. Can I be that?
Yeah.
Over there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. But why I became a psychotherapist would have been for loads and loads of different reasons. And I didn't become a psychotherapist after school. After school, I left and lived on my own and, I had a clothes shop. I didn't study to be a psychotherapist until I was about 30.
Huh.
Yeah,
like a clothes shop is like secondhand, or you made clothes, or okay.
I left school and I was selling jewellery on the street. I was a street trader. And then I had a stall in a market, man. And I was very hippie and really liked life. And ultimately, after a few years, I got a shop that was a lot of second-hand clothes. Not only second-hand clothes, but a lot of it. Loved it. But after a few years of that in my 20s, I suppose I wanted a bit more depth. And I sold the shop and studied.
Why? What was there an initiation of that, or just like kind of a growing, like, what am I doing? I need to do something more substantial.
Yeah, I need to do something a bit deeper than 12 XL, 10L, oh jeez. I remember just thinking, oh man, there's more to life than this. Even though I love the rhythm of the shop, I love getting up and you go to the shop at 11, open it up, close it at 6. It was in the centre of Dublin, so it was very much a social hub and it was great crack. I did want a bit more depth in life, and I went to this course. No, I went to an open evening where they talked about counselling, and I went, by the way, I went to loads of counsellors in my 20s. And, I would have had a lot of different problems and a lot of, distress. And I thought all the counsellors were diabolical. And I used to think, I could do better than this. continuously with my I went to lots of different counsellors and psychotherapists, and I consistently thought, like, why are they asking me that? That's a stupid question. Why should she ask me that? Of course I could be annoyed with that. And so in a way, I often think I became a psychotherapist as a kind of a feeling, oh, Jesus Christ, I could do a lot better than them. I'm deadly serious.
Well, looking back, do you think that you were right in your assessment of their capabilities now that you're trained and practicing?
Honestly, I do. I think, yeah, I probably was a difficult client. I probably was very challenging. I still am. But I still think, yeah, there's an awful lot of counsellors who do seem to do a lot of really distressing things. And I don't know why, but, there's an awful lot of builders who do bad building work. Do you know what I mean? But I think the impact, and the research bears me out on this, the impact of bad counselling is so hurtful, so damaging, And I do think my instinct was correct, that when I was in my 20s, they weren't handling me right. Who knows? I'd say it was hard work.
Well, is it better to not go to counselling than to go to bad counselling?
Believe it or not, yes, it is. Yes, it is. That's, as far as I know, the research would say you're better off not going than having harmful counselling.
Yeah. My favorite movie is The Departed by Scorsese. It's about a bunch of Boston police people. But one line in it that's in it is that Irish people, Sigmund Freud said that Irish people are immune to psychotherapy. Do you think that the Irish mindset is particularly difficult for psychologists to crack?
You're right, because I would consider myself very typically Irish. And I was definitely a very difficult client. I know, that always made me laugh that Freud said that. Yeah, there's a rebellious thing, 800 years of oppression bring in us any authority is wrong. And, the classic Irish nature of, well, why would I tell you that? You know what I mean? And the kind of cute-hour. Do you know that phrase, the cute-hour? Kind of thing of Irish. Yeah.
No.
Cute-hour. As I know it's very much a kind of Irish phrase, as in you're a bit clever and you're kind of one step ahead of people and a little bit funny with it and never quite give everything away, and your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. And that doesn't work for psychotherapy, where you need to reveal yourself.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I identify with that. If I really am. I mean, I'm like 80% Irish, and so I identify with that.
I wondered that. I saw your name and I thought, boys, I wonder is he Irish?
What are you giving your time to in the discussion around gender dysphoria, trans issues, women's issues right now? What's the flashpoint right now for you?
By a million billion miles, how we deal with the children. You know what I mean? That there's a condition has become suddenly incredibly common, and it's gender dysphoria. And other conditions have happened in psychology, and they have kind of, as such, spread. If you look at, bulimia and things like that, they have spread. So we know this happens with psychological conditions, and gender dysphoria is really, really rampant at the moment. And I don't know that we're really treating the children very well with this. I think we're messing with their heads, and we need to be much gentler with them and much more, that phrase, first do no harm. I think we've lost it. It's by far and away, by a million miles, the thing that distresses me. I really do think that, if you want to transition as an adult, you should be supported, and off you go. And I wish you well, and I hope society makes every single kind of move to welcome you. But I think with children, we just have to slow that right down. I think medically intervening in children's lives, then puberty blockers are really, really problematic. And I've thought that right from the beginning, and it's only when I really explored it and I realised in my own life, well, it was puberty that got me out of it. Now, had I been offered the puberty blocker, I would have taken it faster than you could say. I would have grabbed it. And had I even heard the concept of it, I would have jumped at puberty blockers. And I don't think that would have been right for me, because I think it would have sent me on a medical path that would have been more difficult to come back from. And as it was, I came back from an emotional path, which I found incredibly hard to come back from. If I tried to come back from a medical path,
Yeah.
Would I have? I don't think so. And then I became so comfortable in myself. And I'm not saying that the trans life is worse than the cis life as such, but I am saying there's a very heavy medical burden to transitioning. And I'm glad that I don't have that burden because I didn't need it. You know what I mean? From the age of whatever onwards, it just was not an issue. It never came back. The gender dysphoria never came back. I know it stays with some people, but it never, not a trace of it ever came back. You know, I often think, you know, some people have depression and they get treated. They might get treated with talk therapy or they might get treated with medicine. And for some people, it never comes back. For some people, it stays and you have to try different ways to manage it. And, you know, it's similar. And some people, the right way to manage it for them might be to transition. That's fine, but stay away from the kids.
Yeah, modern society is, we have the power of gods, but not a fraction of the wisdom, or potentially the 1,000-fold more of the foolishness, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, there's a real issue that because medical science can do it, they want to do it because that is stretching their professional competence and it's very interesting for them. Yeah. But that, we're people, leave us alone. Like, you know, just because they can do it doesn't mean they should.
Yeah. Thank you for opening up. Thank you for exploring that with us.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity, Benjamin.
How did you come across my stuff? Just through Twitter or something?
Oh, I've been watching you for ages. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I like your stuff. I've been watching, I don't know, as soon as I got into all this, I suppose, somewhere along the way.
Oh, okay.
I saw it, yeah. I didn't know, I heard you mention that you came from the race. I'm still a bit stunned about that, and I know I'm going to go off tonight and start looking that up.
Oh, geez. I have a documentary on my channel if you really want to be horrified.
I will. Yes. Yeah, I will. Because, you know, it's weird. We're coming into a world where we're getting so much more polarized. Like, even like if you look at the kind of veganism and stuff like that, that's becoming more polarized. Everything, every issue is becoming this kind of, you know, one or the other, and there's no middle ground. It's frightening.
Yeah. It's very immature. It's incredibly immature.
Yeah, maybe it is. It does seem so inappropriate because the whole concept of life is messy. Nobody has the solution.
Are you sure?
What, do you? What is it?
I've made peace with the fact that I'm a fool. I just try to act wisely within my limits.
What's that? We're born of risen apes, you know, not fallen angels.
Could you say that again?
We're born of risen apes, not fallen angels. That's some quote from way back, and we really are. Like we're not far off the animal world, really, are we?
No, we're just ambling along with a little bit more shellac on top of our animal nature, you know?
Congratulations for reaching the end of the podcast. If you enjoyed this product, consider donating to this channel via paypal.me/Benjamin Boyce or joining me on Patreon. Also follow me on Twitter at Benjamin A. Boyce. Have a good night.